5 due diligence items that you need to complete when purchasing a larger apartment building. And when you're purchasing a larger apartment building, it's very important to make sure you're covering all your aspects of the due diligence and not just completing a simple building check and lease review like you would do with a smaller residential property. So the first one, the paper review. What I mean by this is reviewing the leases and reviewing the financials for the property. In combination with checking the leases and just making sure that what the lease says is what the owner is saying, make sure that you check a ledger, collections for the property, and ensure that the tenants are actually paying their rent. I can't tell you how many times that I've sold a building and the owner will say, well, such and such tenant has been behind on the rent a month or two. And if they're not an ethical owner and choose not to tell you that, you won't know unless you make sure that you're reviewing the collections and matching it all up for each unit. Pay very careful attention to the financial review and the paper trail just to make sure that everything matches what the seller is telling you is the truth. And in conjunction with that, it's a great idea to ask for the seller's Schedule E or the tax return information for this property, because tax returns generally don't lie, and what is on their tax return should be an accurate reflection of how the property is performing. The second one is building components, and this is checking in depth the physical components of the building and making sure that it is in good condition, or at least the condition that you're expecting it to be in. One of the things that is often overlooked by buyers that I see commonly is having the plumbing line, the sewer lines for the property scoped and checked out to the street, because many times the line from the property out to the street is the responsibility of the property owner. And oftentimes over years, trees will grow into it. Maybe it's an old pipe and it collapses in part. And if that's leaking, that can be a major expense later on that the seller may not even be aware of. So fully investigating the physical components of the property can save you a lot of money and time and frustration later on. The third thing is a code, a municipal inspection check. Now, a lot of municipalities do have a requirement that when a property is sold, an apartment rental property is sold, that it be inspected before it transfers. So if that's a requirement, it'll get done anyway. But if it's not a requirement, that municipality, call them up and ask them if you can request it. Maybe they have a semi-inspection that happens and you would like to have it completed early to make sure that the building is not in any violation from a code perspective. And then also have them verify that it is a legal, however many units, if it's 10 units, 20 units, that each one of those units are a legal unit allowed to be occupied. The fourth one is environmental check. And environmental issues are usually not something that investors in apartment buildings think about, but it's really important, because if you miss it and there is an issue, it can be a huge liability. Even when it does not seem apparent that there could be an issue, it's a smart idea to have at least a desktop review done to check any past historical records relating to environmental items on the property. And oftentimes banks will require this. If you're getting a traditional commercial loan from a bank, they'll require this as part of their process. And what they're checking for is not just for this property, but also surrounding properties that may have had an issue. If, for example, next door, there's a retail building and it appears to be harmless, but that retail building maybe 30 years ago used to be a gas station that had tanks buried in the ground that maybe leaked into the ground, that then ran over into the ground underneath your property. So that's an example of how things that don't seem obvious could affect your property from an environmental standpoint. Make sure that you're doing your environmental due diligence and checking it as well. The fifth one is insurance, and this one has become more and more of an issue as we go into an environment where insurance premiums are going up and there's more and more claims. Make sure that you have a trusted insurance policy that's carefully examining the components of the building, and quoting you a fair price for what the property is, because oftentimes buyers are surprised when they go to get insurance that the cost is substantially more than what the seller's paying. And that's oftentimes because if the seller has not had any claims and they've had that policy for a long time with the same insurer, that policy won't go up significantly. But when it's re-quoted to a new owner, the cost will be much more than what the owner is currently paying. Ensure that you're doing your careful review of insurances, and oftentimes going with the current provider may be the best bet in order to save money as well as time. Those are 5 due diligence items that you should make sure you're doing when you purchase an apartment building. And if you're looking to do so and buy investments in Pennsylvania or Maryland, please reach out to us. We're happy to help.